Assalamu alaikum. I'm so happy to be back. I think I was sometime here last year, and it's great to see so many faces and so many, mashallah, familiar faces as well. So, Bismillah, Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. Today's topic, Islam under the Darwinian lens. We have a lot of people who attended from last time. Last time's talk was about Darwinian evolution, whether it was true literally or whether it was just a valid scientific theory. And I argued for the latter. I said it's a valid scientific theory, but it doesn't mean it's true. Today we're doing something different. So we're not talking about the validity of Darwin's theory or the problems with it or the philosophical issues. We're talking about something quite different. We're speaking about Darwinism and Islam. We're speaking about Islam under the Darwinian lens. So the way I want you guys to think about this is, as a Darwinist, say there is somebody who is studying organisms. They're looking at anatomical traits, they're looking at psychological traits, linguistic traits, and so on. Using the theory of evolution by natural selection, they not only need to explain our anatomy, our genetics, our psychology, our linguistics, they also need to explain the origin of religion, the origin of the need for spirituality. And they have to give a Darwinian account of this. So today's topic is different because today's topic is about, can Darwinian evolution explain Islam as a natural phenomena? Now this is very interesting because I've never actually delivered this topic before. I've spoken about evolution at many different universities, but this topic I have not covered before, so I'm really looking forward to the Q&A and what your thoughts are on this, because this is kind of like a real test of Darwin's theory and a real test of Islam, to see the nuts and bolts in both and see what they can actually produce in terms of explanatory power. How many people here have heard of this book, Sapiens? Raise your hands. Okay, quite a number of people, right? So Sapiens is a book by the historian Yuval Noah Hariri. This is a world bestseller. This is one of the most popular books. You will find this at airports. You'll find this in, obviously, coffee shops, people reading it. But interestingly enough, this book is not just reviewed in, say, major newspapers and there's a lot of interest in it in terms of the public. What's interesting is people we recognize as leaders, world leaders. Mark Zuckerberg, the owner of Facebook, Barack Obama, and Bill Gates. What do they have in common? Well, they're leaders, but also that they recommend this book. They recommend Sapiens, right? So for the president of the most powerful nation on earth to recommend a book, that means something. And of course, the most powerful platform, social media, recommending something, and obviously in terms of the IT sector. So this book has a lot of weight behind it. And this book claims it can explain the naturalistic origin of religion, and including Islam. It does actually speak about Islam as well. So what we want to do today is see, okay, does this book really match up to its supposed status? So we have this magnificent status that it has publicly, but academically, is this book really that good? And what I'm going to be doing is, I'm going to be contrasting Yuval Noah Hariri against basic ideas that we find in academia in regards to that field. Straight away, if you were to look at the works of Sapiens and look at the works of anthropology, you would find a difference between the public understanding and the academic understanding. So I was really surprised when I was reading one of the reviews of this book by a legendary anthropologist. His name is Christopher Hallpike. Now, he wasn't pleased, let's just say the least, with this book, right? His review was quite negative, and that's quite surprising because this book, Sapiens, is about anthropology, is about the history of humanity. And here we have a leading evolutionary anthropologist who is disparaging this book. He is basically making some very strong arguments against this book. And what we need to understand is that whenever we have a popular book, it doesn't mean that that book reflects academia. Now, Christopher Holpike, he's been publishing books since the 1970s in this topic of anthropology. So that's around the time that Yuval Noah Hariri was born. That gives you a sort of idea of his sort of status in academia. So here was his review. He said, science is not exactly Hariri's strong point, which is strange because that book is about science. Not to judge Sapiens as a serious contribution to knowledge. And that summing up the book as a whole, one has often to point out how surprisingly little he seems to have read on quite a number of essential topics. And straight away you start to understand, wait, so we have this public perception of Yuval Noah Hariri as this amazing person who's enlightened us about anthropology and the origin of religion, and then in academia, a big heavyweight is basically saying the opposite. It's saying, look, it's not really that good. So what we're going to cover today is, one, why this book doesn't really represent academia, and two, even within academia, even within the Darwinian tradition. Because remember, Christopher Holpike is an evolutionist. He's not somebody who, is challenging Darwinism or challenging sapiens based on some religious orthodoxy. It's basically his academic understanding of the Darwinian tradition. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at not only the criticisms of this book in regards to what academics say about it, but also the actual problems within academia to explain the origin of Islam, right? And that's why this topic is quite niche. So let's look at a few key ideas that Hariri tries to put out. So one of the things he is explicitly clear about is that evolution shows that there is no God. Evolution shows there is a naturalistic origin to humanity, a naturalistic origin to biological life, and we do not need God. So he's very clear about this in the book. He says, just as people were never created, neither, according to the science of biology, is there a creator who endows them with anything. There is only a blind evolutionary process, devoid of any purpose, leading to the birth of individuals. So you can't get any more clearer than that. He's saying from the science of biology, we are getting an answer that there is no God. What's surprising about this is you don't even need to be that well read in philosophy to understand that this claim cannot be right, simply because science doesn't disprove God. Science is an explanation at best of how the world works, not why the world exists. So you can even have in the world today, and we do actually have in the world today, theistic evolutionists. We have people like Francis Collins and others who are people who accept the Darwinian picture, but they say God is behind that process. So clearly this is something that even Darwin would have disagreed with, because Darwin, and this is very important to understand, he was first started off his life as a Christian. He left Christianity and he became a deist. A deist is someone who says there is a creator, but does not believe in revealed religion, does not believe in holy books, holy prophets, or anything like that. So when Darwin published The Origin of Species, he believed in God. When he published his ideas in the public, and those ideas got some backlash, rather than saying, yes, this theory does undermine God, all of his behavior was actually contrary. So for example, when he published The Origin of Species, in the first edition, and the first edition created the biggest ripples because it was very, controversial. So a reviewer wrote about Darwin's book that whether God created all of the species individually, or God created one cell which evolved into the tree of life, that reviewer said it would be just as noble whether God was to create all life individually or God was to create all of life in terms of the first cell. Darwin was so impressed by these words, he included them within his second edition of The Origin of Species. So Darwin was not somebody who saw his theory as being anti-God. He did not believe that. That is a later hijacking of his theory by militant secularists and atheists. Now, he said something very interesting. Darwin continued to believe in God even after he published The Origin of Species, but then near the last 10 years of his life, he became an agnostic. An agnostic is somebody who says, I'm not sure if there is a God. So why did he change from being someone who believed in God to being agnostic? He changed because of the problem of evil and suffering. He went through a lot of personal tragedies. He had a lot of health problems. He loved his daughter very much, and she passed away at the age of 10. His beloved son passed away at the age of 2. So he found it very difficult to reconcile the idea of a loving God and there being evil and suffering in the world. However, he wasn't exactly comfortable with that position, and he continued to search and learn. So there is a book called Darwin and God by Nick Spencer, in which Nick explains the misunderstanding that the public has and the reality of Darwin's belief about God. And interestingly, this is what Darwin says in a letter to a friend. It seems to me absurd to doubt that a man may be an ardent theist and an evolutionist. So he was clear that there is no doubt you can have a belief in God and you can actually believe in the Darwinian theory. And he also says, in my most extreme fluctuations, I have never been an atheist in the sense of denying the existence of a God. So even though he became agnostic, he's acknowledging, I wasn't an atheist and I never could be an atheist. Because for Darwin, that was a radical position. So what we need to understand is, right off the bat, Yuval Noah Hariri he is not correct in saying that the science of biology has shown that there is no God. Now, it's not only Darwin that would have disagreed with him. In fact, today, if you look at the field of philosophy of biology or philosophy of science, you will find atheist philosophers of science saying the very same thing, because there is a public perception which is wrong, so they try and clarify it. Now, Elliot Sober, he is a well-known philosopher of biology, and he makes this case against those who claim evolution shows there is no God. Newtonian theory and Darwinian theory suggest to some people that there is no God. However, this is not what these theories say. It is a philosophical interpretation of those theories, one whose justification requires additional premises. So what he's saying here is this: the science of biology does not lead to the conclusion that there is no God. That is a philosophical argument if someone was to make one. And to make that philosophical argument, you need to be very clear what your premises are, what your argument is, and why you think those premises are valid, and why you think that conclusion logically is inferred from those premises. But that's not what Hariri does. Hariri simply states that there is no God because of the science of biology has shown that. However, an assertion is not the same thing as an argument. He actually needs to give an argument here, which he doesn't provide. So, just from the very opening of this lecture, I hope you see that he is confusing biology with philosophy, mixing the two, mixing oil and water, and we're getting some very strange results. So we're going to move away from theology and move into the realm of human nature. So this is what Hariri says about human nature. Having so recently been one of the underdogs of the savannah, we are full of fears and anxieties over our position, which makes us doubly cruel and dangerous. Many historical calamities, from deadly wars to ecological catastrophes, have resulted from this over-hasty jump. So here he's making an argument about human nature. And this human nature, again, he's getting from anthropology, supposedly, that this is our nature, that we're full of fear and anxiety because of the way that we evolved on the savannah. However, this is what Holpike says about this particular claim. No, we're not full of fears and anxieties about our position in the food chain, and never have been. Because a species is not a person who can remember things like having been the underdog of the savannah tens of millennia in the past. Knowledge of our life on the savannah has only been vaguely reconstructed by archaeologists and anthropologists in modern times. So look, if you have that skull, the picture that I have there, how are you going to tell a story using that skull? If you have some tools, how are you going to make claims about fears and anxieties and those leading to the particular warlike state that humanity finds itself in centuries later? So what you find here again is that Hariri is overstepping the line, going beyond what academics can say. Because if you're trying to reconstruct a history of the origin of religion, of course you need to give some ideas which are supposedly in those heads. But those skulls, all that we have is anatomy. We don't have thoughts. We don't have something we can access. So where is Hariri getting this from? And also there's another conceptual flaw that he makes here, which is something we wouldn't really expect of somebody who's well read on evolutionary biology, is that a species is not like a person who can remember things. This is very important. Natural selection is not some metaphysical reality which is keeping everyone up to date about what happened in the past, or it has a goal in the future, or humans collectively, we have this Assassin's Creed type of thing of remembering what our ancestors were up to. These are pure wild speculations, and to make claims about human nature, of course, are going to be wrong. And to make claims about the future of humanity, they're going to be wrong too. And then to make claims about what's going to happen in the much further future, which is what Hariri does as well, is going to be even more flawed, because he started off on a tangent. So now let's move on to Hariri's claims about religious human nature, that we have this religious human nature, and where did it actually come from? Now the first thing, before I read out what Hariri has to say, is I want you guys to understand. Science has a rule known as methodological naturalism. That is a rule. So imagine I walked into this room and I applied a rule to everybody. Anybody wearing the color red has to throw out that color, and you're not allowed to have the color red in this room. So this looks red, I'll throw that out. That sister's wearing a red scarf, throw that out. Everything that's red, you throw it out. Now when everything red is thrown out, then I say to you guys, red as a color does not exist. Would that be a logical conclusion? No, it wouldn't be a logical conclusion, because that's known as circular reasoning. There is no red as an assumption. Conclusion, there is no red. No, that was an assumption. You've confused an assumption for a conclusion, right? So what we need to understand is that the claim, there is no God, using evolutionary biology is identical to the claim of somebody throwing out all the color red and then saying there is no red. Because the rule of methodological naturalism says, science cannot mention God. Science cannot mention the soul. Science cannot mention any immaterial object or any immaterial entity. Science only deals with the physical. Now in the 1,000-year history of science, this is a fairly recent introduction. In the late Victorian times, when science became a lot more militantly secular and atheist, that's when this rule was introduced. When prior to it, when the Muslims were doing science, or the Christians were doing science, or the deists of the Enlightenment were doing science, this rule did not exist. So because of that rule, any anthropologist is not going to say people believe in God because they say, or because of the fitrah, people believe in God because there is a God, a priori, meaning before they look at the evidence, they know in terms of their scientific understanding, we cannot say there is a God. So Hariri is, if anything, he is highlighting for us the type of circular reasoning that people can get involved in. Anyway, let's look at the religious human nature claim that he makes. There are other claims made by other anthropologists, but the same rule of methodological naturalism applies. However, he still manages to get this wrong, which is very surprising. So let me just explain how this works. There is a solution in anthropology which is based upon the assumption of methodological naturalism, and that solution Hariri still manages to get wrong, which is very strange for someone who supposedly is having his books promoted by Barack Obama. When the agricultural revolution opened opportunities for the creation of crowded cities and mighty empires, people invented stories about great gods, motherlands, and joint stock companies to provide the needed social links. That's very artistic. It's very interesting. When I was reading the works of Hariri, I was like, this is really flowy. This is really nice. This is like, the guy knows how to write. But the problem is that I found the book in the non-fiction part. It should have been in the fiction part, because anthropologists, they wouldn't say anything like this. For example, Hallpike says, the idea of people inventing religious beliefs to provide the needed social links comes out of the same rationalist stable as the claim that kings invented their religious beliefs to justify their oppression of their subjects, and that capitalists did the same to justify their exploitation of their workers. Religious belief simply doesn't work that way. Again, this is very important to understand. When we have a very popular understanding of evolutionary anthropology, which Hariri tries to point out, it looks like there is a very clear answer. People just invented it because they wanted to cooperate. But when you look within the academic literature, not only do you find that that is not the case, you also find that there's a considerable amount of disagreement and mystery about the origins of religious belief. Nonetheless, they still have to try and explain it in a naturalistic way. And what I want you guys to understand as well, from an evolutionary perspective, evolution has been very much misunderstood as a process of progression. Oh, that guy is acting in a very stupid way. He hasn't evolved. So evolution is seen as, well, if you're bigger, better, smarter, more complex, you are better evolved. When that's not how evolution works. This is a big misunderstanding of Darwinian evolution. Raise your hands if you think the life of Isaac Newton was a successful life. From a scientific point of view, from whatever point of view. Isaac Newton, right? Let me replace Isaac Newton with somebody living in a village in Philippines who milks cows for a living, and he has 5 children. You would think this person who lives and dies in a village in Philippines and has had made no impact to the intellectual progression of humanity, you would think that person would not be as important, not be as successful as Isaac Newton. However, from an evolutionary perspective, that person is fitter than Isaac Newton, because Isaac Newton did not have any children. He did not get married. So from an evolutionary perspective, it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. If you are smart, intelligent, you contribute to the world, you are moral, you fight for social justice, you do any of these things, the only criteria to decide whether you are successful from an evolutionary point of view is how many children you can have, right? So religious human nature, when they're trying to give an explanation and they're saying, well, what we did is we invented a story to help human beings cooperate, what we need to understand is that is implying that we can foresee a goal and then work for that goal, or as if natural selection is working towards a goal, right? That's not true. Natural selection doesn't work by looking at potential problems in the future, or natural selection is not trying to get us to be more spiritual or more moral or religious or intelligent. It doesn't have an agenda. It is a blind evolutionary process devoid of any agency. So again, Hariri is making claims which cannot be justified. Okay, another interesting thing which I'm very much, which I was happy actually Whole Pike corrected in terms of what Hariri was claiming, but I thought there was a lot more that could be said about this. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a background in terms of the atheist narrative. The atheist narrative that we have in the world today is when people were primitive, they used to be polytheistic, and then slowly through polytheism, they somehow decided to become monotheistic, and they were still monotheistic until about the 16th century, when science came as the great liberator of the religious myths of the past, the ancient fables, and then people became atheistic. So there's this beautiful picture of polytheism to monotheism to atheism. That popular narrative is completely false. It's completely false. Why is that false? Because historically, we've actually had polytheism, then monotheism, then polytheism, then monotheism, then polytheism, and monotheism, and you get this constant cyclical thing going on. In fact, think about it from a point of view of Islam, the fitrah. What is the fitrah? The fitrah is something the Prophet ﷺ told us. Every child is born upon the fitrah. Every child is born upon the natural inclination to go towards a creator. Now, that doesn't mean that that child knows Islam. Islam is different to fitrah. That means that it has that instinct to connect with God, that its true happiness lies in its connection with God. So the fitrah explanation, it would make different predictions to what an atheistic explanation would be. Now what's interesting is this very crude idea that we went from polytheism to monotheism to atheism, we can show to be incorrect just by looking at the major religions in the world today. So for example, the traditional Hindu religion, the religion of the Indus Valley, this religion is associated, of course, with polytheism. And this religion does not fit within this picture that these atheists try and project. The reason why is because Hinduism today is a polytheistic religion. However, when you look back at ancient Hinduism, you find that in the books, the holy books of Hindus, it mentions the existence of God and the nature of God in a way that is very similar to the monotheistic Abrahamic conception of God. For example, it says there is but one God. It says, do not make an image of God. Do not make idols. So the traditional religion of India was monotheistic. And then over time, they became polytheistic. Likewise, next door in Persia, we had the religion of Zoroastrianism, and we had in China the religion of Taoism, and in Latin America we had the religion of the Aztecs, the Mayans, and the Incas. However, all of these ancient religions, when you go back and look at their history, you will find a type of proto-monotheism or something very close to Abrahamic monotheism. I was in Latin America last year, and I was speaking to somebody from that region, and that indigenous person was telling me something very interesting about the history of Latin America. Central and South America is thought to be polytheistic and pagan. This is the traditional understanding of this region. However, what's very interesting is the Incas, the Aztecs, and the Mayans, these ancient civilizations, they had documentation and writing of their history. And in their ancient history, they have records of people preaching monotheism, even though when the Spaniards arrived, they were polytheistic. But in their history, they have this. I was in a small country in South America known as Paraguay. Paraguay is a very unique country within Latin America because it's a country in which the indigenous language is the main language. Spanish, as you guys know, it became the dominant language in Latin America because of colonization. However, Paraguay, they still speak as the main language Guarani. Guarani is the indigenous language of Paraguay. Now the Guarani is an indigenous people to Paraguay and the surrounding areas. And when I was there, we were obviously there to try and talk to them about Islam. And a lot of these people have actually converted to Christianity. Most of Latin America and the indigenous communities are Christian. However, we came across indigenous people from Paraguay. And we asked them about their beliefs. Their beliefs were this: there was one God, and you should worship one God, and you should pray to one God. And they had prayer beads with 33 beads. And one of the things that they used to recite was, I believe in God, I believe in God, I believe in God. They believe God is going to send a new prophet to the world. These people are monotheistic. And what's beautiful about these people of Paraguay, these indigenous people, is they are untouched by Christianity, those particular people that we met. Majority of them have, however, converted. But what it goes to show you is that monotheism you will even find in some of the most primitive societies in the world. Monotheism to the traditional atheist narrative of polytheism to monotheism to atheism is total nonsense. However, let's look at what Hariri claims, and let's look at what Hall-Pike actually says in reply. In regards to how we evolved from polytheism to monotheism, this is what Hariri says. With time, some followers of polytheistic gods became so fond of their particular patron that they drifted away from their basic polytheistic insight. They began to believe that their God was the only God, and that he was in fact the supreme power of the universe. Again, that's a very simplistic story. And we do not find, when Hariri makes these claims, that he supports this with any scientific or evidence from anthropology. He doesn't do anything like that. He simply asserts it. And this is what Hall-Pike says in return. This is amateurish speculation. The search for meaning led to a new breed of thinkers, prophets, and philosophers who searched for a more transcendent and universal authority on how we should and gain tranquility of mind, that went beyond the limits of their own society and traditions and beyond the purely material prosperity. So what Hall-Pike says is that humanity went through this stage which he calls the axial stage, which is well known, and he says, and Hariri doesn't seem to have heard of this stage called the axial stage. And this was a stage in the first millennium of massive social upheaval. And what started to happen across the world is people started to question their traditional paganistic values, and that rationality that led to monotheism. It wasn't the case of simply people thinking, okay, I'll just prefer to believe in one God now before I used to believe in this. Hall-Pike actually makes the case that actually there was a rational thinking, that this rational cosmic order, that there must be a creator behind this, one universal creator. Because even Hariri says this in his book, that monotheism explains unity, explains why we have uniformity of nature, why we have this sort of system, right? Polytheism doesn't explain that. So this claim, I just want you to understand something. If what Hall-Pike is saying and Hariri is saying is not evident to you why it's important, I want you to consider something. Let's go back to what Hariri is saying. Hariri is saying, we just decided, okay, we're polytheistic, so let's become monotheistic. And here we have Hall-Pike saying, no, it was a rational, conscious decision based upon the understanding of nature. What's the difference? One clear difference is, if what Hariri is saying is correct, then it was an irrational choice to go from polytheism to monotheism. And if what Hall-Pike is saying is correct, It was a conscious, rational decision. And it wasn't just something we just decided. Also, a little note on that. This is in regards to the first century, right? The first century. In regards to the history of monotheism and polytheism before the first century, of course, we have a lot of going back and forth, and we have a lot of going back and forth after the first century as well. Okay, another claim that Hall-Pike makes, which I found to be quite, not disturbing, but polemical. Because the standard atheist narrative is the 16th century onwards, when Europe moved to a more enlightened view of the world, people became atheistic and skeptical and secular. So any link between religion and science, the link that they try and make is religion was undermined by reason, undermined by science. So one of the things that Hariri does is he repeats a popular atheist narrative. He repeats a popular atheist narrative that religion was being undermined by science, and science, according to Hariri, the scientific revolution of the three revolutions that he speaks about, was a revolution that's only been around for about 500 years, right? So this is what he actually says. The scientific revolution has not been a revolution of knowledge, it has been a revolution of ignorance. The great discovery that launched the scientific revolution was the discovery that humans do not know the answers to their most important question. Pre-modern traditions of knowledge such as Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, and Confucianism asserted that everything that is important to know about the world was already known. This is a really childish claim. You go speak to any Muslim in the world, and even an ignorant Muslim, and you try and tell them, Islam says everything that's already known about the world is already revealed in the Qur'an. Even the most ignorant Muslim will tell you that's not true. Yet here Hariri is popularizing a cliche that Islam is a religion which claims everything that was ever known or should be known is already told to us in the Qur'an. Well, in fact, Allah in the Qur'an says the very opposite. He says, do you not reason? Do you not think? Do you not reflect? Do you not use your minds? Do you not talk about that which you do not know? Allah says He created that which you know and that which you don't know. The Prophet ﷺ said to us, every disease has a cure. Every disease has a cure. Search for the cure. His teachings teach us to search for the cure. That's the moral imperative in Islam. Where did this idea come from that Islam says everything that's known, was already known, is in the Qur'an, we don't need to do anything else? From the life of the Prophet ﷺ, from the life of the Salaf, from the life of the early Sahaba, we understand they were thirsty for acquiring knowledge of technologies that they got from the Greek world and the Persian world. We understand this. So this whole idea of, right, Islam's a very irrational religion and scientific revolution started 500 years ago is total and utter nonsense. Now, one thing I want to speak about briefly is the idea that science began 500 years ago in Western Europe is a myth which needs to be put into the bin. However, this myth just doesn't go down. It just keeps reappearing again and again. Science began 1,000 years ago. The scientific revolution did not begin 500 years ago. Hariri is wrong about that. It began 1,000 years ago. Prior to Islam, the Greeks had a type of proto-science. The Hindus had a type of proto-science. The Egyptians had a type of proto-science. The Babylonians had a type of proto-science. However, what's known as the modern inductive method of science, in which you have testing, observation, falsification, theorization, peer review, theory, that is something which Hassan ibn Haytham formalized 1,000 years ago. If anybody was to study the history of the scientific method, the reformulation of science into what we consider science today was done by Hassan ibn Haytham. Hassan ibn Haytham is the first scientist. There's a great book by a historian known as Bradley Stevens, The First Scientist, Ibn Haytham, in which Ibn Haytham, he quotes, and Ibn Haytham says, I am studying science to be closer to my Lord, to be closer to God. And here we have atheists saying the exact opposite, that if you believe in God is somehow a hindrance. In fact, some academics say, if it wasn't for a theological stage that humanity had to go through, science may not have germinated, may not have began. Why? Because if you start off with a monotheistic idea, then the universe is rationally comprehensible and there's a moral imperative to discover things. So this whole idea that reason is against religion and is somehow science which led to the downfall of religions or is leading to a downfall of religions is totally false. In fact, I have a picture here. Anybody recognize where this is from? Spain, Cordoba, right? Fantastic place, southern Spain. I'd recommend if you can go there. Spain was under the rule of Muslims for hundreds of years. The first scientists from Europe, when they traveled in the 12th century, they traveled to Islamic Spain. Just like we go to the Western world and we dress up in their clothes, the first scientists from the West, they traveled to Islamic Spain and they dressed up like Arabs because they felt these are superior people with a superior culture. And it is that infusion of knowledge from the East to the West which led to the foundation of the Enlightenment, to the scientific revolution within the Western world as well. So the scientific revolution of the Enlightenment, of what happened in the Western world, is a byproduct of an earlier revolution of science that happened within the Islamic world. So Hariri is completely, he's speaking against history. There's no other way to put it. Even though he has a doctorate from Oxford, on the minimum, he should read the works of people like David C. Lindbergh and others who are historians of science who would never ever agree to endorse those sort of statements that he has in his book. And again, what's very interesting is we have this link between being an atheist, being a Darwinist, and being rational, and being more scientific, and being more logical. However, what's very interesting from a philosophical point of view, atheism and rationality are not good bedfellows. Why? I want you to consider something. If we are a product of a cosmic accident, if we are the product of a cosmic accident, of a blind naturalistic process, then what reason do we have to trust our minds? It's a very simple argument. And it's something which philosophers and even Darwin himself tried to grapple with. How does irrationality, a blind evolutionary process, lead to rationality? How can you get from nothing to something? Now, from a theistic point of view, Allah says in the Qur'an, I gave you a mind. Do you not think? Do you not reflect? It is He, God, who gave you hearing, sight and minds. Little are you grateful. God links rationality to Himself because God created us so we can trust our reason. We have no reason not to trust our reason. But from an atheistic perspective, you cannot justify reason using reason because that would be circular reasoning. Also, natural selection, the traditional story that they tell us, is that it made us into creatures that care about survival. Truth is irrelevant. Falsehood is irrelevant. It's only relevant if it helps you survive. You can survive on true beliefs, you can survive on false beliefs. You can survive on both types of beliefs. So their explanation of religion is that, oh, it helped us survive, that's why we actually have it. So natural selection, from a atheistic perspective, it's given us a mind that's primed to believe and be fostered by anything that helps us survive rather than whether it's true or false. However, even if somebody happens to be a theist who accepts evolution, they can say, well, that's not true because God gave us a mind, and even though they accept the evolutionary process. But if you accept the evolutionary process and you're an atheist, you have a very difficult time. Now, about this particular issue, the atheist philosopher of biology, Alex Rosenberg, this is what he says. The difficulty that even atheists have understanding and accepting the right answers to the persistent questions shows how pervasively natural selection has obstructed true beliefs about reality. Because remember, from an atheistic perspective, whether you have true beliefs or false beliefs, the only thing that matters is your survival. And we know that you can survive quite well without actually any false beliefs. What's interesting is what Hariri says in his latest book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, is his claim that he made earlier that it's human fiction. It's our ability to create fictions which helped us cooperate and then helped us flourish. He recognizes that those corporations, they have made it so that we don't actually value truth as much as we actually should, truth for its own sake, because there's a delicate balance between truth and falsehood in terms of cooperation. So this is what he says. The truth is that truth was never high on the agenda of Homo sapiens. Many people assume that if a particular religion or ideology misrepresents reality, its adherents are bound to discover it sooner or later, because they will not be able to compete with more clear-sighted rivals. Well, that's just another comforting myth. In practice, the power of human cooperation depends on a delicate balance between truth and fiction. Here, Hariri doesn't really realize, but he's actually shooting himself in the foot. Because from an evolutionary perspective, truth is not valuable intrinsically, it's only valuable instrumentally, as much as it helps you survive and reproduce. And according to him, since we survive on myths, then we actually need false beliefs. However, from the Islamic perspective, we can give a very clear answer. We can say we value truth because truth is intrinsically valuable. Allah, His name is Al-Haq, the truth. So we have a value for truth which is God-given. Truth for us is not instrumental. Now about this, Holpike says something very interesting. You know, when Hariri in the book, he mentions about humans surviving on false beliefs and myths and religions and limited companies and these types of things. Holpike says that Hariri fails to distinguish between false beliefs and conventions. There's a difference between a false belief that if we all come together and we start to say, okay, let's believe in something or the other, and let's all get together and let's make a limited company. This is a convention, it's not a myth. So Holpike also criticizes him in that regard. Okay, now we're going to move on to something else. We spoke about why Hariri was wrong when it came to God. We spoke about why Hariri was wrong when it came to human nature. But now things get really toxic and you get a lot of contradictions in his own thoughts. And this is what he actually says in Sapiens. There are no gods in the universe, no nations, no money, no human rights, no laws, and no justice outside the common imagination of human beings. This is a theologically toxic, philosophically confused statement. Anybody who is to read this statement with a little bit of criticism, they would recognize this is not a scientific statement that should be in a book about science. This is a metaphysically loaded statement without any justification. So he's saying human rights or the idea of morality, all of these things are fiction, just as religion is fiction. And likewise in the book he says humanism, feminism, liberalism, even that is fiction. Now the funny thing about this is, if we become moral nihilism is what? There is no morality, there is no meaning to these things, there is no right, wrong, no ought not to do. Then why should we even listen to the content of the book? Because you can believe in truth or you can believe in falsehood, but to decide to believe in truth rather than falsehood is a moral decision. So if you say morality, human rights, right and wrong, all of these things do not really exist, justice does not really exist, then why should we believe the contents of that book? And in fact, in the same book that he says there is no human rights, there is no justice, and all of these things are human imaginations, there is no good and bad, the same book he speaks about, this is oppressive, this is good, this is evil. And this is what Holpike points out as being quite irrational. Holpike says, throughout the book, there is also a strange vacillation between hard-nosed Darwinism and egalitarian sentiment. What Holpike is saying here is, on the one hand, the Darwinian picture, which someone, if they were to take metaphysically seriously, that nature is red in tooth and claw, and that we evolved to survive, and bottom down we are selfish, and we don't really care about others, and human rights do not exist, and good and wrong doesn't exist. Then why in the same book is he speaking about egalitarian ideas of equality, of happiness, of justice, of human flourishing? These two surely contradict. So that's something that Holpike points out. Another thing Holpike points out is, but a consistent Darwinist should surely rejoice to see such a fine demonstration of the survival of the fittest, with other species either decimated or subjected to human rule, and the poor regularly ground under the foot in the struggle for survival. So Holpike's saying, look, if anything, if you're going to be a true hard-nosed Darwinist, you should be not making value judgments on this idea of how humans behave and how it doesn't fit in terms of egalitarian sentiment. You should be happy as this is a confirmation of Darwin's theory. This is a reconfirmation of what he is actually saying. Now I'm going to give you a really bizarre way that Hariri tries to show there are no rights. And this is something that was so funny that when I was listening to one reviewer talk about this, one academic talk about this, he actually said, I feel like strangling Hariri. Like that was his reaction, right? In terms of what Hariri says about rights. So this is what Hariri says. Equally, there are no such things as rights in biology. They are only organs, abilities, and characteristics. Birds fly not because they have a right to fly, but because they have wings. And he gives a really ridiculous argument. Human rights, when they were formulated in the United States, they were explained as being self-evident, immutable, and God-given. So they're God-given rights. But Hariri says, but we have mutations. So those rights do not exist. And he gives a really strange example. And his strange example is to do with an ostrich. So he says, birds fly. And we say they have a right to fly. However, the ostrich, through environmental changes and mutation and whatnot, it's lost the ability to fly. So it doesn't have a right to fly, therefore rights are mutable. Ostriches can't fly, therefore rights don't exist. This poor, pathetic argument is something which should be laughed at. However, in terms of the credibility that's given to this book, some people actually think this is a philosophical argument when it's actually a philosophical joke. This is why Holpike is right to point out that this is a type of crude, hyper-materialism. And this is what he says. Holpike says, if Hariri's test of reality is only what we can see, touch, smell, then mathematics, like truth, should also be a prime example of fiction. He's saying, look, if you really want to go down that road, and you want to confuse what is immaterial with what is false, then you might as well say truth is false. You might as well say mathematics is false. However, he makes a bit of a funny remark about Hariri. He says, and if mathematics is fiction, then so is the whole of science, including the theory of relativity and Darwinian evolution, which Hariri would find very embarrassingly indeed, because he loves science. He is just in a philosophical muddle that confuses what is material with what is real, and what is immaterial with what is fiction. If there was a mic drop academically, that would be a mic drop. Yeah, he's saying, look, your worldview is devastating your very book that you want us to believe in. Now, one of the claims that he makes in his recent book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, is, from an ethical perspective, monotheism was arguably one of the worst ideas in human history. However, in his other book, he says there are no human rights. How do you reconcile these contradictory ideas? And how do you reconcile something else fundamental, which is that traditionally human rights and the idea of morality, right and wrong, ought and ought not to do, these things were given to us by monotheism. They were not given to us by atheism. For example, in a Hadith Qudsi, Allah says, I have forbidden injustice for myself and I have forbidden it among you. So do not oppress one another. It is the Islamic injunction of right and wrong, objectively, not subjectively, not subject to environmental changes or human behavior or human ideas, which gives grounding to these things. And prior to, obviously, Islam being introduced in the Western world, they knew of Christianity, and Christianity is the reason why we have human rights today. It's a Christian dream, in the words of Douglas Murray. It is a Christian dream. It is not something that you can actually find philosophically justified within atheism. Now, in the last couple of minutes, I want to speak about, let's dig in to Islam and how Darwinists try and explain Islam. Okay. We were evolved to conform, do in Rome as Romans do. However, this thing has to be explained from an evolutionary perspective. What's the adaptive benefit of conformity? And what the academic Julia Cotta says is, if we are unsure of ourselves, we are more likely to look around at what other people are doing and imitate the most common behavior. From this perspective, the directive, when in Rome, do as Romans do, can be seen as an adaptive shortcut. So it's very clear from an evolutionary perspective, we should conform. Yet we look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, he did anything but conforming to society. He lived in a land of polytheism, where polytheism was the currency which kept society together socially, culturally, financially, economically, and in every single way. And he broke out and he said, La ilaha illallah. He said, there's none worthy of worship except Allah. He challenged polytheism. How do you explain that from an evolutionary perspective? From an evolutionary perspective, when the Quraysh said to the Prophet, we will give you everything, give up your message, he should have said, yeah, of course. But he said no. He said, La ilaha illallah. And he worked for that until the end of his life. That cannot be explained from an evolutionary perspective in terms of conformity. Religion is supposed to be an adaptation. Now, if it's supposed to be an adaptation, then it's supposed to have adaptive benefits. Like Rosenberg says, just think about religion, any religion, every single one of them is chock full of false beliefs. We won't shake any of them. There are so many. But beliefs must have conferred lots of adaptive advantages on believers. However, I want you to consider something. They claim from a evolutionary perspective that religion reduces anxiety and provides comfort, integrates society. However, then the same people, the Darwinists, from amongst them you have evangelical atheists like David Silverman, who are firebrand evangelicals trying to promote atheism. You can't have your cake and eat it. You can't say religion provides comfort, religion provides integration, and at the same time religions are violent and we need to fight them. These two completely contradict each other. This very scary looking dog is a real dog. It's known as a Mongolian dog, right? This Mongolian dog, if it was chasing you in a desert and there was you and your friend, if your friend was an atheist and you're a Muslim, or you're a theist and you're running, and as you're running you decide to pray for help, you're more likely to get eaten than your friend who's an atheist who keeps running, who believes in naturalism. So this whole idea which they try and promote, oh, religion is bad because of this, no, religion is good because of this, no, belief in good is good because of this, they're actually in a muddle, and we can actually give them examples of this type of behavior in which having a belief in God is detrimental to your survival. And the Islamic explanation in terms of the fitrah of religion makes a lot more sense than the idea that religions evolve because of some sort of adaptive benefit. The Islamic explanation is that we have a fitrah within us, and that is driving us to connect with Allah. And as the Prophet ﷺ says, every child is born upon the fitrah, but their parents change their religion. It's the societal pressures which change the fitrah, which colors it into a new philosophy rather than the Abrahamic monotheism. And look at the adaptive benefits of applying something in your life, like the Prophet ﷺ said. He said, none of you have faith till he loves for people what he loves for himself. That is not adaptive behavior from an evolutionary perspective, because you're loving for others what you love for yourself. What we should act like is what Professor Dawkins says is, much as we wish to believe otherwise, universal love and the welfare of the species as a whole are concepts which simply do not make any evolutionary sense. So when we contrast Dawkins against the Prophet ﷺ, against the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, we see that one's teaching is clearly non-adaptive, and they cannot explain the origin of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Lastly, the success of Islam. How is a religion which is chock full, according to them, of false beliefs which are non-adaptive, became successful? In Hariri's own words, in the 7th century, Islam became the largest empire. Why is that religion flourishing even in the world today, if it has non-adaptive benefits? Lastly, the need for spirituality. Yuval Noah Hariri, he wants us to accept a view of the world in which we evolved and in which beliefs in God are myths, and the beliefs in superstitions and these things are all within us. And we need to move away from that world into a world of truth. However, let's look at his own life. He's not exactly a prime example for Darwinism. He doesn't have children. He has dogs instead. How does that make sense from an evolutionary perspective? How does it make sense that he actually has pets rather than having children? If he was true to the Darwinian tradition, he should actually be showing us by having many, many kids. Now, I don't want to fall into the naturalistic fallacy, is ought. I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying his behavior is not in line with what a Darwinist would actually expect. Now, what's interesting is that Yuval Noah Hariri speaks about spirituality. He meditates an hour in the morning, an hour in the evening, and he meditates for one part of the year. And he says we need spirituality, but spirituality by definition is immaterial. Spirituality by definition, if it is real, then atheism's false. Yet he is an atheist. And we find militant atheists today who are Darwinists, like Sam Harris, who are writing books like Waking Up to tell people to believe in spirituality. But how can you believe in spirituality when there is no immaterial? These people are trying to connect, but there's no internet, there's no connection, there's no Wi-Fi. To connect, you have to connect with a metaphysical reality which is real, which is the Islamic paradigm. Allah says in the Qur'an, verily in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find peace. In the remembrance of Allah, a real entity, do hearts find peace. Spirituality and atheism are not going to go ahead because they're not comfortable bedfellows. One contradicts the other. When from an Islamic perspective, if Yuval Noah Hariri is correct and there is a need for spirituality, then he has to explain why we have that craving when it has no evolutionary benefit. Islam is a religion which makes a very simple claim which I want to end upon. We're not just physical. We're not just here to survive and reproduce. We're here for a higher goal. And what is that higher goal? That higher goal is to worship the Creator. And worship is what in Islam? Loving Allah, fearing Allah, having hope in Allah. And as the scholars say, we're like a bird, with one wing being fear, one wing being hope, and the main body of the bird being love. And when you enter Jannah, love enters, the hope goes away, the fear goes away. Everything good I've said is from Allah, every mistake is from myself. Jazakallah khair.